I had a dream as an 8-year-old growing up on the Gold Coast. I wanted to play cricket for Australia. I wanted to wear the baggy green. And I chased that dream for as long as I possibly could, till ambition went that way and ability went that way. So it meant that dream came to a crunching halt. But then I had another dream, and that was that I was going to be an incredible sports administrator. So I became a recreation officer in Townsville City Council. I worked at the Commonwealth Games. I worked in an international sports marketing firm that was run by Greg Chappell. And then I became National Director for Australian Volleyball. So again, I pursued that dream till Australian Volleyball said, we're taking the office from Brisbane and we're going to Canberra. And I said, great, but I'm never going to Canberra. So I had another dream. This time, the dream was I was going to be a professor in sports studies. So I went to TAFE, got a diploma, taught in TAFE, went to Canada with 2 young children and a wife, got that master's degree in sports administration, and lo and behold, I got a job lecturing in sport, my dream, in Canberra. So I pursued that dream for some time till universities decided that the only way that you could pursue really a career in university was to have a PhD. I had a master's. That dream evaporated. I was doing no more study. I'd done enough. And who really, in the end, wants to know everything about the top of a pinhead? Apologies for all the people in the room who have PhDs and do know the top of a pinhead. Great skill, but wasn't for me. So then, another dream. I was going to become a Director General of a Department of Sport. So I came back to Brisbane and managed a program called Aussie Sport. I managed sports funding programs till a job was advertised, coach of the Queensland cricket team. Now, I'd never dreamed of being a coach, but this intrigued me. So I spoke to Ian Healy, I spoke to Alan Border a little bit about this role. In the role was a guy by the name of Jeff Thompson. He'd been there for 4 years or so, and as Mark had pointed out, Queensland hadn't won the Sheffield Shield for 68 years, and of course I was able to stack my pedigree of having played for Queensland. I made 160 runs for Queensland as an opening bat, albeit in 14 innings. Stack that up against Jeff Thompson, who'd only played 50-odd tests for Australia and taken 200 wickets, and was one of the most feared bowlers and huge history and success in that arena. So how was I going to stack my CV up against his? Well, it made me stop, think, go to my quiet place. And my quiet place in those days was running. So I'd run out along the river and think about why I did what I did. Why do I think the way I think? Why do I act the way that I act? And so that reflection took me back to my childhood. It took me back to that backyard on the Gold Coast. It took me back to my parents. It took me back to school and teachers. It took me back to the people that I mixed with. It took me back to university when I first went to university and the players that I'd played with. Both good and bad, all sorts of things mixed together. And of course it took me all the way up to that present time, my work experiences, etc. And in all that, I began to work out that what I had been doing a lot of the times in my life was actually coaching. I was bringing a group of people together, trying to achieve something, and then working towards that end. So therefore, when I got that opportunity to sit in front of Queensland cricket panel and suggest to them that a person who had made that 160 runs brilliantly versus Jeff Thompson, who'd played an incredible number of test matches for Australia, that I was the right person for the job. And I remember one of the questions they asked me that particular interview, and they said, how are you going to win the the Sheffield Shield for us. How are you going to win this Holy Grail? We've been in the competition for 68 years and no success, albeit they'd come close a number of times. And I said, that wasn't the job. Or at least, if you wanted to employ me, that wasn't what I was aiming to do. What I said the job was, in terms of the way that I saw it, was that Queensland had to dominate domestic cricket for the next 10 years. That's where we were going. And to do that, we would look at systems and processes and a whole range of things to put us in a position and hopefully win the Shield somewhere in there. That was what I was intending to do. That was born out of that running, that quiet time, that taking me back into why I did what I did. So I want to share that with you first of all, because in essence it's your philosophy, it's your principles, it's your values, it's your cornerstones, of which you all have and of which you demonstrate every day. But if I asked anybody in the room here to come up and in 30 seconds or less explain to the rest of the room what your philosophy, what your belief system is, what your values are, can you do it? Some of you will be able to, because some of you have actually probably spent the time to think about that and to do that. But for me, it is so important that we actually understand what that is. So I want to just briefly share that with you as the first part. And then I want to actually take you to what I do today, and that, as we said, is what my corporate life is about. But that's been born out of hindsight now, looking back at my coaching time, at my professional coaching time, and it puts the philosophy, if you like, into a framework of leadership. So, if I go in the right direction, here it is. So, part of me was always about this picture, this vision, about wanting to change the game. As I said, when I sat in front of that interview panel and said, no, it's not about winning the Holy Grail, it's actually about us dominating domestic cricket. That was the way that I operated, and it's the way I've always continued to operate. It was the way that I operated with the Australian cricket team when I first met them in Brisbane in '99, and that was to say that we were going on a journey to Everest together. And along that journey, and by the time that journey had ended, and nobody knows when that could have been, hopefully what we will have achieved is something that had already been achieved in Australian cricket history beforehand, and that was that there was a team in 1948 called the Invincibles. They'd been given a label because they'd done something pretty special at that point in time, in that point of time of Australian cricket history, but also world cricket history. So for me, our journey was to also, because of the way that we've played the game and the way that we've changed the game, when our journey ends, that we would also be given a label, hopefully a good label, but given a label about some of the things that we'd done along the way. So this idea of a picture, a vision. The next one was around creating this learning environment, and you'll see different words, but lots of overlap with what Nigel has been talking about already. So the learning environment was always about taking people where they hadn't been before, growing them, making them feel uncomfortable. A quick story, 2001, my first tour into England, we took the team via Gallipoli and then on to London for the Ashes series. And when we arrived in London, there was our first meeting. Two questions. Firstly, what did Gallipoli mean to you as an individual? And then secondly, I provided them with a little management book called Who Moved My Cheese? Some of you might have it, some of you will be aware of it. But a perfect book for athletes, of course, because it's thin, with big print, some pictures, and lots of gaps. So we had the meeting and various individuals expressed what Gallipoli had meant to them, and there were some incredible stories and how it impacts, and I'm sure there are people in the room here who've been to Gallipoli and possibly understand what I'm saying. For me, what I saw when we went to the various battle sites were lots of headstones and generally a name and an age, and the age would have been 18 years or 19 years or 20 years. And so right at that time, I rang my son, who was 15 at this point, and basically said, I love you, because it just seemed to say incredible fragility of life, young men going off for an adventure and never returning. Other people expressed different thoughts. As we progressed around the room and discussed who moved my cheese as well, I came to Andrew Simons, who's a lovable larrikin, one of my favourite cricketers, but one of my favourite people, and still is. And Andrew's parents were both teachers. Quite obvious, because his command of the English language and his vocabulary were extremely poor. And this is not to say that our educational system is poor. What I mean to say is that they did all his homework for him. And so, to Andrew, finally, so who moved my cheese, Andrew? What cheese are you going to move on this tour that will help us as a team develop and grow and hopefully win some games? And he looked at me and said, Coach, up until now, I've never read a book, and I haven't started now. Unfortunately, we weren't able to move Andrew's cheese in terms of reading a book, but he did some great work on tour for us. So, never being satisfied. Very quick principle here that you will all recall. You all know Fred Flintstone, or most of you would recall Fred Flintstone. Well, this is the Fred Flintstone principle. Never satisfied is not about not being unhappy. It just means that there's always a better way. That was the way that I believed everything could be. No matter how well you're going, everything can be improved. If it ain't broke, break it. So, Fred Flintstone principle, you remember Fred jumps in the car of a morning, off he goes, no worries about punctures. Why? Stone wheels, not a problem. I don't know why we don't have them these days. Then to work, you know, the air-conditioned vehicle with all the air flowing through, gets to the quarry, does his work, meets Mr. Slade every so often, or Slade, has a conversation, bird gets its neck pulled, screech, off he goes, clock out, gets home. What happens? Goes through the front door. Who's waiting for him? Wilma. Yes, what has Wilma got for him? Dinner, and it is big brontosaurus steak, you know, fantastic. Knock on the door, who's there? Barney. What's Barney carrying? Bowling rocks, yes, right. Off they go to the bowling alley, twinkle toes, you know, crash, crashes. Rocks go everywhere, comes home, great, in the door. Oh, forgot to put the cat out, puts the cat out. Then, of course, the reverse happens. But what does Fred do the next day? The same thing. And what does he do the next day? The same thing. So Fred has made a choice. He is satisfied with his life, and that's where Fred stays. So for me, I wanted to take Fred to the world of George Jetson. That's where I wanted him to go. Okay? And that was always my choice in terms of what I do. The notion of invisibility that Nigel mentioned there before, it is about making yourself redundant as quickly as you can. Many of you will be parents in the room, and so part of our job when we're looking at our children is to try to give them more and more leash, if you like, more and more experiences, more and more opportunities to get out there and experience the world, more and more opportunities to not necessarily get things right, but to learn from them, but also to get things right and really build their confidence and self-esteem. So coaching is exactly the same thing. It is that opportunity to keep standing and pulling back and giving your staff or your players or your athletes, whoever it might be, that opportunity to get out and make errors, but also do things well. But as a coach too, and as a parent, as you know, sometimes you need to actually give that leash a little bit of a tug, bring them back into a bit more of a confined space, so a little bit more education and parenting can go on, and then allow them to roam once more. Around the whole person. So putting in the time to try to get to know the individual as a person. For me, not as the athlete, or for you, not maybe as a staff person, but who are they? And of course, their prerogative is not to let you in. That's their right. But of course, the more that you can develop that relationship with them, the more that you can get to understand them, and therefore the more that I think you can actually be of assistance to them in their current role. So what our players wanted to be their best cricketers, to play. That's what they did, that was their passion, that's what they were doing. But to help them do that, I would like to understand a little bit more about them. and then putting that into some sort of planning framework, which is what I'm going to talk about shortly. Because again, as you know, most of you will have a whole range of operational plans, business plans, maybe you've got daily plans. How often do they fall into place exactly as you've written them? Very, very rarely. Lots of things come in that you don't necessarily plan for, don't necessarily see. Therefore, a plan, while it gives you a framework and a direction in which you're going, it needs to incorporate flexibility so you have the capacity to respond to what's in front of you right now. And then finally, there's your own sort of value sets, your own culture that you bring to your staff or to your organisation. And generally for me, if I wrapped it up in 3 possible words, one is around family, this whole concept of family. What does that mean? And that means different things to different people, but for me, family is very much about love and care and support. And so that's what I would try and bring to a group of people that I operated with. Then it was about hard work. No matter what you're trying to do, there's no getting away from working hard to try and achieve that. And then around integrity. So integrity is obviously about doing what you say you're going to do. So that wraps up the notion, I guess, of trust and honesty, etc. So they're the principles upon which in 1994 I sat in front of a interview panel to tell them why I should be doing the job. I didn't express it necessarily in that way, but that's my reference points. That hasn't changed from then to now. When I look back on my day-to-day, when I look back while I'm talking around here and things are going around in my head, am I actually delivering that? Am I doing that? So, to help that, as I said, with the benefit of hindsight, I've gone back and looked over my professional coaching career, then my working career, and where did this kind of philosophy, value, principle set fit in? Because it's great to have one, but what do you do with it? How do you make yourself relevant? How are you resilient? All those R's that Nigel mentioned will come from you being very clear on necessarily how you reflect and what you reflect upon and the relationships that you develop. So here is my Everest model. It's my Everest model that I use for either leadership or I use for teams or I use for individual development. And while the words will be different, the framework is exactly the same. So firstly, we get our base camp into place. So yes, as I said, if you haven't had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to go to your quiet place, whatever that might be, and try and work out why I do what I do, what is my philosophy, what are my principles, what are my cornerstones. So important, step one, base camp. Tied into that then is this notion of sacrificial acts or sacrificial plays, and that term came from, Nigel knows this, being an AFL supporter, but also we had the opportunity to talk at the foundation a little bit, from a coach of Carlton, David Parkin. And when we won the Sheffield Shield in that first year in 95, Carlton won the flag in 95. AFL supporters in the room? 1, 2, a few. Any Carlton supporters? They never generally put their hands up. Yeah. So in 95, Carlton won the flag. David Parkin was the coach. And I got to meet him afterwards because he said a couple of really interesting things. One was about being on the northbound locomotive in that particular season. So in other words, they felt like they were unstoppable. They were on this big piece of momentum that was just taking them to the flag, so it couldn't be stopped. And then he talked about sacrificial plays. And the sacrificial plays were numbers on players' efforts in a game that weren't necessarily recorded by some traditional statistics. So AFL people, give me a few traditional numbers that you'd think about when you reflect on a game. Disposals, behinds, goals, frees, inside 50, hard ball gets, blah, 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 right? So there you go. Everybody understands AFL now. So that's sitting over here, and as Nigel has said, and I totally support, is they're your results, and you must get results. No escape from that. But How do we get those results? And so what Parkin was then recording was all the players that were helping others to get those numbers. And he called those sacrificial players. It's discretionary effort. And so that started me out on a journey then of measurement and data gathering to see whether or not we could understand those sorts of things that contributed to a result. Because he said at the end of that season, if they committed, and I think the number was 64, sacrificial acts in a game, they never lost a game. Never lost a game. Now, they didn't set out to necessarily record those, but they recorded those as an outcome of the way they were playing, and there it was. So that, as I said, set me out on a path of how do you know that you're on track for success? And this is one of those indicators. So from there, with your base camp in mind, this notion of sacrificial acts, then it's so important that you create your game plan, your overall model for winning. And this is about you. This is about you. Now, we can say the same thing about teams and individuals, but this is about you as a leader. So what is your game plan that you take when you leave here today back to work? What does that look like? So for me, there were some number of elements, things around certainly understanding me. Secondly, understanding the job, the role, what it demands, and as you know, that can almost change day to day sometimes, but what is the role? What are the expectations? What are my KPIs, etc.? Who in my team are my disciples? Who are the key influences that I need to know that they're in touch with me and I'm in touch with them? Who are they? Then, as I say, it's about the whole person in all the people that I'm dealing with. Am I in touch with them as an individual? How close can I get to them? That's as a whole person. But also, they're here on a daily basis, work. So who is the work person that I need to be in touch with? Then there are things like you are, in a sense, an agent of change, or at least that was the way that I always saw myself. So as a manager and a leader, as I said, I would always be questioning and challenging the way things were being done, the status quo. There must be a better way. How do we find that? And so therefore that challenges systems, process and people. Then other things around having the right people around you. Who are the right people? So I didn't, as a coach and a leader, I didn't want clones of me in my environment to support me. I wanted people that were different to me, that would challenge me and also challenge some of the things that we were doing. Then, as I said, success measures in any organisation. How do you play the politics? What are the politics? Who are the political people? Are you a political person? Do you know how to play it well? And if you don't, who's going to play it for you? And then, of course, there is this whole review process, a reflection, because where you're going, the summit, if you like, is the legacy you leave. So when you leave work today, or indeed when you go back to work today, and God forbid that that's your last time with those people for whatever reason, what will they say about you? What's the eulogy they're going to write about you? What's your legacy? So, game plan, your model for winning. Now, we've got to put that into action. That's what I say, when you get back today, you need to put that into action. So how do you deliver that? There you set plays. These are your actions and behaviours. So, again, for me, how do I deliver on my sacrificial acts? If that's part of my game plan, if that's part of my philosophy, how do I deliver on that? And so I need to be checking about ego. Get the Skyhook song out and maybe I can check in on that. But is it about me or is it about them? Is it about this notion of servant leadership? How do I stand in the background? Am I standing in the background? Am I giving other people the support that they need? How am I delivering on that? How do I deliver on my values? Because the reason for understanding yourself is that Nigel's number 2, relationships, is so key to coaching. All people want from you is consistency. As a leader, all people want from you is consistency. It doesn't mean you have to be liked. It doesn't mean that they have to agree with you. But what they have to understand about you is that you stand for something. And the same thing every day, all the time. They're your values, they're your principles, they're your cornerstones. That's who that person is. What makes it difficult to lead is if you change that person from day to day or situation to situation. Trying to develop trust, trying to develop honesty in a environment then becomes very difficult because nobody knows who you are. They don't know who you are and who you are going to be and what that means for them. The word failure came up before, so in terms of me and never being satisfied, I'd always say failure is not a word in my dictionary. I would deliberately, and still do, try to avoid the word fail or failure. Only because, yes, there is an outcome that hasn't been achieved. But what I would prefer to look at is what's already been done, in a sense, to get to where you got to, but right at that moment in time. And if I reflect on a cricket moment, for instance, somebody gets a duck, good ball, and they say that person failed. Well, no, my view would be to go to them and say, well, how did you prepare for that innings? Did you do all the things that were going to give yourself best chance of success? Yes, I did. Okay, so that's great. So at that point in time, what happened? Well, maybe it was a poor choice. You know, the things in your control. Maybe it was a poor choice. Maybe it was poor execution. So there's some things you can fix quite quickly. And sometimes, as you know, it's out of your control. So maybe they got a bad decision, and that's what happened. So yes, they got a duck. People say they failed, but no, they've done a lot of good things in the meantime. Okay, so and then pressure. Pressure is a myth. Pressure is a choice. Pressure is a choice. If we feel under siege, if we feel overwhelmed, we're making a choice, because that's in our control, because it's about how we respond and what we're going to do about that right at that moment in time. So these are some of the things that come out of my philosophy, and so that I'm checking, if you like, on a daily basis, on a quite a regular basis, about what I'm doing. Am I living my values, principles, etc., through my game plan and into my set plays on a daily basis? So that brings us to the last point of the framework, and that is the review. So, as I said before, as I'm standing here, I'm really trying to review myself as I'm talking to you. Am I actually clear? Am I communicating well? Am I getting the message across? And by the looks of the number of people that are falling asleep out there, maybe I'm not. But that's constantly going on in my mind, and it keeps drawing me back into me. Just keeps drawing me back into me. Can I do my best at this moment in time? And if I can't, what is actually happening that I need to change immediately to try and improve upon that? So reflection is one of the keys of having a coaching framework. But of course, what do I reflect on? What do I reflect on? And these are your key reference points. Yes, results. Okay, got to get them. Coach, you've got to win games. Yes, understand that. Business, you've got to get profit. Nigel, you've got to get dollars coming in. Got targets to meet. Yes, understand, got to do that. But how do I do that? How do I give myself best chance of leading for that success? That's the reflection piece for you. That's your personal scorecard. That's your personal scoreboard as you track that over time. How do you put that together? Do you put that together in your mind? Do you put that together on a piece of paper? Do you use some sort of technology to do that? And maybe it's already built into your system. But the reflection piece for me, again, needs to be daily. Daily. Because if you take away from today and tonight, on your drive home or in the train or in the bus, after dinner, whatever, reflect back on the day. And even if you haven't got your reference points, just try and remember what actually happened in the day. You can't. It is so hard. There's so many things that are going on. So therefore, the longer you leave that reflection, the harder it is to actually understand, well, what sort of a day it was. Because in the end, you want to try and improve yourself as a leader, improve your performance as a leader, and hopefully that leads to other results as well. So this reflection is so important to be done so regularly, but reflecting on the right things. Okay, so I shall leave those thoughts with you, but to again summarise. Firstly, know yourself, accept yourself, love yourself. If you don't, nobody else is, all right? So important step, and that comes out of understanding the way that you operate. Then put together your framework. What gives you best chance of success as a leader? Do you know that? What puts you in the spot to win every day, in inverted commas? Do you know that? And if you've got that, are you testing that? Is that really the right thing? Because then that's the last part. That's your reflection. That's your ability to test you and the way that you see yourself and the measures that you have for yourself, your personal scorecard, your personal scoreboard. Is it working? Thanks very much.